you are enough and you belong. Creativity is so subjective. Like, no one can tell you what really is good or bad, right? It's like really believing in yourself.
You are now listening to The Gradient Radio, an open space to converse about creativity with creatives. And I'm your host, Antonio Knoxx. And today we have a special guest. Today, our guest is a visual strategist who is the owner of Ryano Graphics, the creative director for Black RVA, and the creator of Richmond Her. Today, our guest is Shannon Bass.
Hey.
What's up?
What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am blessed.
Yeah. I want to thank you for, coming out. I can imagine that your life is extremely busy, and for us to be able to have this moment right now, it's just, a blessing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So for the people who may not know who Shannon is, could you introduce yourself?
Okay, so I am a graphic designer. I'm a mother, a wife. I am a advocate for Black creatives and Black businesses. So that's a part of like everything that I do. Really love supporting Black folks in all the spaces that we are in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how did you get your start as a quote unquote creative?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I had like a Mac computer way back, like late 90s, maybe early 2000s. My mom brought one, and it had America Online. And she let me kind of explore. So back then there was like no World Wide Web. It was just kind of like, the internet. I kind of explored there, really enjoyed kind of getting on to America Online. I started making my own birthday flyers back then. So I kind of started being creative with the computer pretty early. I don't think anyone in our family or friends had computers back then. So it was kind of like my introduction to, design. I was super extra with all my projects when I was younger. So I've always kind of been in like a creative person. But the computer was kind of like that tool that really kind of allowed me to push it a little bit further. So I think that was probably a catalyst for me once I got that. Yeah.
So did you go to school after having like this passion? Did you pursue it in the sense of, going to college for that specific discipline?
Yeah. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I talked to my counselor. She's kind of like, tell me what you're interested in. I'm telling her I like being on the computer. I like making stuff. And then she basically was like, so, have you looked at communication school, like graphic design being your major? And I'm kind of like, no. And so she's like, well, based on your grades, like you should look at UNC Chapel Hill. They have a really great, J school. And I was just like, all right, cool. Like, of course, I'll look at it. I mean, I applied to a whole lot of HBCUs. I applied to local schools. But when I went there, like, I really loved the people. I loved the campus. And it kind of began to, like, set my career in motion because it had, like, a journalism school. You learned, like, how to write papers, how to interview people. But also we learned, like, the foundations of graphic design. So went there for undergrad, got my degree from UNC Chapel Hill. So I was kind of able to like really step into what it meant to be a designer by learning, from there as like my foundation in design. So yeah.
What year was this? What year did you graduate?
That's a long time ago. So I graduated from college in 2006.
Okay.
Dang, I'm old. Okay. Yeah. So I've been doing it for a while.
Yeah.
Like,
The only reason I asked you that because like 2000. I would say around that time, 2006, 2007, I saw an article that was basically stating how graphic design within like the next 10 years was going to be like an industry. Mm-hmm. And it also talked about like how Android was going to be like everywhere as well. So it was like that article was like the future in many ways. And so that's why I really pursued like design because I saw that like it was going to become a thing, even though like it was kind of a thing, but like it's more of a thing now.
Yeah, back then people were like, graphic design, like people really couldn't understand the idea of it.
Yeah.
Though we live with it literally everywhere, it really just wasn't like a common thing to be a graphic designer. I think a lot of people were like graphic designers and they were doing like newspaper. And I think people kind of understood like, oh, you do newspaper layout, that kind of stuff, or magazine layout, which is what you learn, you know, foundationally as a designer. But at that time, I think photojournalism was starting to become a thing. So people were kind of like transitioning into that and using it as like a tool. So it was kind of like a really interesting time where people kind of understood it, but we were kind of like pushing the envelope a little bit. I would say a lot of people I graduated with, probably half work in it and maybe the other half don't. So that's how it was then. Like it was kind of like hard to find careers that were like really valuing like graphic design back then. So it definitely took a while. A lot of people did newspaper like design and layout because it was easier, you know, you could easily get into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, graphic design has definitely become more mainstream today. But back then people thought like, you know, you say you're a graphic designer, they think you're like fixing computers. You know, they don't really understand. But like back then we're using Flash, we're using Dreamweaver to build websites.
Facts,
I was building websites in Flash. So, you know, it was kind of like a cool time to be around, but like computers, like having like a laptop was kind of becoming the norm. Like we had to have like a Mac. And, you know, before Macs were not. Like, it wasn't the thing, you know? So it was like really expensive to get a Mac computer, but it was required for us. So that was like a cool, you know, it was a good start for me to kind of start at school, have that as my foundation, and then kind of jump off from there. So,
No, you really bringing back so many memories. I definitely remember getting like Dreamweaver and like using Flash. And I remember when they were like trying to remove away from Flash because like Flash was like so outdated. And I was like, yo, like how can you like get away from this? Because it had all of the animations and like the properties, like the cool things, right? But I can understand how like slow
it was super slow. Like that was when you sat on the website and it would load up the entire Flash site, and like you would have like countdowns or like music playing in the background. But it was kind of before its time a little bit, right? Because you were creating these animated websites. I did websites for all of the fraternities and sororities on campus,
and all that was on Flash.
I built so many sites in Flash. I'm like, ooh, thinking about it now. But back then, I mean, everybody wanted, you know, music to play and things to move when you first loaded up the site. So I did a lot of Flash sites while I was in college.
What was it for you? Because I know for me, like when I got my first MacBook computer, like that was just like amazing to me. Like, because just coming from like the Windows world and how I felt like that was behind in terms of like where Mac was heading. I remember I got my first MacBook on my 20th birthday. And I had that computer for like 10 years.
They definitely last.
They last a very long time. So like, was that like a moment for you when you got your Mac, or like you always had like Macs?
So the crazy part is I always had Macs. Like, so there was this pilot program that Mac did. So back then it was just like Mac. Everything was Mac. No, was it Apple? I can't remember. But they had a pilot program where they worked with like high schools across the country. And they gave them laptops.
Macs,
So I had this like desktop at home where I was like getting on America Online and doing my own thing. And then they basically were like, hey, we're doing the pilot program and everybody's going to get like a Mac laptop. So I kind of was exposed to a Mac laptop really early. And so by the time I got to college, I kind of was familiar with the platform because that was kind of like my second, that would have been my third Mac at that point.
It's crazy.
So my whole experience, like literally when I first started using computers, like by myself, I started on a Mac and then I moved to like a laptop for high school. And then in college, we had to buy our own like MacBook. That was like a MacBook. I think it was Pro, MacBook Pro. Like I think it was 17-inch, you know, the big monitors or the big screens on the laptop. So I always had them. But I think it was cool because that was like my first time in college where it was like the design programs were like a part of it, right? Like you had those like, no, you bought it with the computer, like the Adobe suite. So that was kind of my first time to like have my own laptop that I carried around. I had like all the design software, including Dreamweaver and Flash because I was building sites. But Yeah, I think Macs. That's kind of crazy to have that many Macs
Yes.
back then because they were really expensive. I don't know how my mom got that desktop, but she brought it home one day and like that was kind of the end for me. I was just like, what's this? Like, I want to be on it all the time. I killed all of our hours going on. Like, eWorld was what it was called. So, yeah, I've been a Mac person like since like the late 90s. Wow. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, because I definitely remember, like, I definitely had Windows, and I had like the small Windows. I forgot what they used to call them. It was like the really, really small computer. I can't remember the name. And then I went to Mac. But
yeah, probably a big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. 'Cause, I mean, it also was like a status thing at the same time.
Yeah,
like you just saw a person with a Mac, and it's like, yo, like
they doing something.
They had their lives together,
yes.
something like that, right? Like it was just completely different.
And then they had the colorful ones that came out like in the 2000s, and everybody had like the colorful like clamshell laptops and like the big colorful monitors. Yeah, Mac has gone through a lot of transition like over the years, but it always has kind of been in the forefront. Even at the beginning, people were like, what is this company? You know, like what is this? What's happening here? But you know, over the years, they've always been in the forefront, especially for design. So it was kind of like saying something if you had like a MacBook laptop, like you're serious about, you know, being a designer. So yeah.
So when you went to UNC, were they teaching you? Obviously, they were teaching you on Macs, but were you using like Photoshop? What type of programs were you using at that time? Was it Adobe?
Yeah, so interesting. You know, in most colleges, you don't really get into your major until your junior year. So I really wanted to like get started. So I took a electronic media class, and we were using Photoshop, and it was basically creating art using Photoshop. So I actually have like my first introduction to design software is Photoshop. And I was making like random art pieces, like loading in photos and then like manipulating it to like create different like series of artwork. I was really proud of that stuff. I look back today and I'm like, what in the, you know, but I really was able to like learn, you know, the software really early. You know, when you start with your major in the journalism school, I mean, you're learning art history. So we had to learn like different periods of art. We kind of had like learning the different tools before we actually started getting into the software. And I'm sitting there like, look, just let me design something. And they're like, no, we have to learn each and every tool, what it means, how to use it. So I started with Adobe Photoshop, just doing it creatively. And that was, I learned a lot from the tools just by trial and error. And then in the actual journalism school, I started with InDesign. And so we started doing like layout. That was kind of the first thing. So learning the tools, and then we started doing like laying out like a magazine spread, like different things like that. I think it was called promotional design is what I kind of started with. So we did foundational stuff, and then InDesign was kind of our next step. But all of it was kind of in tandem. We were also learning Dreamweaver in another class, Flash in like a multimedia class. So we kind of were learning like different software depending on like what class you were in. But all of it was pretty much Adobe. I think Coral Draw was out back then. Quark Express, I think we had started to use that. That's super old. That basically was like, you know, InDesign before InDesign. So we learned all of that software early on.
So I'm just curious. This was a question that just came to my mind. With you having like your background and design, what was your MySpace page like?
Not only was my MySpace page extra, I designed MySpace pages for celebrities.
Really?
Yeah. I don't even know.
Say more.
How I got into. I know, like I don't even know how I got into it. I took I had a class where we had to like build a website, Dreamweaver. So I knew a little bit of HTML from there. I think I really customized my page. So like, what was it, top 10 or it was top 8? I can't remember
top
how many.
8, I think, yeah,
top 8. I figured out ways to like, you know, alter those images there. I did all kinds of things to kind of break my space. Like when you came to my page, like the whole background was designed. So I don't know how I started getting into it. I think at the time the guy I was dating was like friends with Terrence from 106 and Park. I think I did his page, Roxy.
Really? Wow.
It's like so many random things. Yeah, so I used to design folks like MySpace pages back then. I don't know how I got doing
That's
that.
crazy.
Yeah. That's my entrepreneurial journey started there. I don't know. I think I charged like, I don't know, 150 bucks
Yeah, it probably wasn't enough. Not even close.
It wasn't. It wasn't. But, took their photos, edited them in Photoshop, and they were like, really, it was cool. It was ahead of the time back then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the music playing when you came to the page. So, yeah. I really utilized what I learned in class to like start my entrepreneur journey. So I was making money, like learning at the same time, and then like going off and like saying like, hey, I learned how to do Flash today, so I'm gonna try to build I'm a Delta, so I built our site first. Everybody saw that in other fraternities, sororities, and then they were like, hey, can you do that? So I would take everything I learned in class and kind of like implement it. And I did t-shirt designs. I was like doing all kinds of stuff in college. So yeah. Not making enough money, but back then, it was kind of like, it was cool. Yeah.
Just learning the process. Yeah.
Yep.
So after you graduated, you finished school, did you start looking for a job opportunity, career opportunities, or did you dive into like the entrepreneurial world?
Nah, I got a job straight out of college. It was still in North Carolina. And I had a conversation with my mom because I felt like, back then, graphic design, like I said, people really didn't understand it. So a lot of jobs would like not be called graphic designer. It may be some type of like laying out newsletters, doing general things with like images and editing. I mean, it really wasn't design. I got the role and I was talking to my mom and I'm like, should I take the job? Cause like it's a job offer. And she's like, is it what you want? And I'm like, it's not. And she was like, well, you don't want to be stuck in a role that you're not doing what you want to do. And then like, years later, you look back and you never got a chance to do what you wanted to do. So I basically gave myself 6 months to find a job. I moved back home and I was like, if I don't get a job, I'm going to get my master's. And then my mom at the time worked at VCU. So one day I'm in her office. She's like, well, what do you want to do? Because I mean, I'm telling people I want to be a graphic designer. And she's like, what is it? Like, what do you want to do? And I look over and there's like all of these like books and pamphlets for like students. And I'm like, design these things. And she's like, well, let's figure out what department it is. So we figure out it's like creative services. My mom reaches out. Hey, do y'all have any positions, internships? They're like, hey, we are going to hire an intern. So I started interning there. 6 months later, I got a full-time job and I stayed there for like 5 years. So that was my first role as a graphic designer, but it was in a creative group. There were other designers there. My boss was a graphic designer. We had web designers. So I just waited for the right opportunity because I just didn't want to stunt myself by like accepting something that later could not put me in the path that I wanted to be on. So I gave myself some time to find the right thing. And I would say that role was like really pivotal. Like my manager at that role, like she really took the time to explain things to me that I didn't know. I learned a lot of things on the job. But it was like definitely a transforming role for me into being like who I am today, for sure.
Yeah. I would say like the first time I met you, I think at that point, which was like 2017, I didn't know that many Black women who were like graphic designers. Could you speak more to that and how like, is it kind of rare, do you think, for a Black woman to be a graphic designer?
I think it's rare for Black people. And I think it's becoming more common. I was sitting on the way here, I was kind of like thinking about like my journey. And I remember I watched this movie with Jennifer Aniston. It's called like Picture Perfect. And she was like an advertising exec. And I was like, I want to do that. And I don't ever remember thinking about what she looked like. I was just like, I want to do the job that she has, like I want to do that. And I kind of just went with that, never really considering the fact that she is a white woman that's working in an advertising agency. It's a bunch of white guys. Never really just thought about it. But as I started to get into like the working world, I started to like realize, like I look around the room and I'm the only one there. And in the majority of my jobs that I've had, I'm the only one there in the room, especially in the creative space. And so I thought by this point in my career that it would be a lot more of us that are in this space. I think there are more, but not as much as I would assume, at this point. And I don't know if it's access. I think sometimes it may be like if you're growing up and you're creative, if you don't see someone that's doing it, maybe you don't really think about it as a career. I've talked about being a designer to like high school students like in the past couple years, and they're still surprised that I like do it every day full time and make money. It's almost kind of like you make money doing that.
It's foreign, yeah.
Which is really interesting. So, if that's foreign to people in general, I think for Black folks and Black women and
Even
Black
more,
men,
yeah.
it's really, really foreign. So, I really am surprised. Like I said, I'm the only one, but I thought like as I got further in my career that I would see more people. I had a job a few years ago, probably 2018 was the first time I ever worked directly with another Black woman as a designer. Prior to that, never worked with any designers that were of color, male or female. And yeah, that's like an anomaly. So I'm surprised that we haven't broken more into the industry. But then I kind of understand it because the industry is still dominated. I would say white males and females kind of dominated. I wouldn't even say it's just a male thing. Graphic design started off being male dominated, but I see a lot more like white women doing it.
Now, yep.
But Black women and Black men, we're like, when I find designers, like I'm like, come into my circle. Like, what can we do together? Because it's not a real common thing,
Yeah. I think that's like one of the things like I realized specifically with like the Black community when it came to people being creatives is that like one, people didn't see the possibilities to be in these particular fields, or it was like they were never supported.
Yep.
And I think that was like the biggest thing because people they think about a starving artist. So anything from that standpoint is like you're not going to make any type of money from it. And so I think because we always we've heard that, we always seen, artists starving in a sense that like people never pursue those type of careers. And I think that's why we haven't had those more of us in this particular industry or just like creative industries in particular.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the second career change for you once you were in that role for about 5 years?
Yeah, so I went to like a company as a contractor. I always was like, I'll never change jobs for money. Like every move I make in my career is going to be like a step up. It's going to be, like positioning me for like this ultimate goal to like, be better in my career. But I just needed a change of scenery. My mom was like, look, it pays more money. And my mom is like, she's really smart about like working and like, the type of attitude you have to have. And she's like, look, you make more money when you change jobs, and that's just a fact.
It's a fact, yeah.
And so I took my next job working as a contractor locally. I was actually like sitting in a print shop, but I was doing graphic design work. Because I was there, I was like, oh, I'm going to learn how to do everything. So I learned how to like run printers, guillotine cutters, layout stuff. I know how to basically run an entire print shop. I learned how to do it. I was like, teach me everything. So I was doing design there, but I wanted to make sure I got the best of like the role. So I was like, teach me how to do everything in here. I stayed there for a little while, got promoted, and then literally moved up to Northern Virginia and like started running my own team.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, it was an interesting shift. Same company, a position opened up. I always wanted to leave Richmond. I was like, why am I back here after college? I was like let me get out of here. So I moved up and I worked in the like a federal government contract. I had maybe 3 designers, a photographer, 3 or 4 designers and a photographer underneath me. So it was my first time like being a manager. And we kind of like worked alongside the people that worked within the government doing design work. So it was a good learning lesson for me. So I felt comfortable as a designer, but then I was pushed to kind of like be stronger be more of a mentor. At that point, it was kind of teaching the things that I learned along the way, like what I learned in my first role and my second role, and kind of like passing that along. The designers were a little bit younger than me then. So yeah, I moved into a managerial role, and I guess it was kind of like my second job with a promotion. And I enjoyed that. Like, it was cool to like help people like grow, in their profession. I was teaching them certain things that I had learned about like best practices as a designer.
Yeah.
So that I felt like I was actually like kind of giving back in that role. But I also was like, I don't want to manage people. Like I would rather be like a mentor where we're discussing, I was having to do like evaluations, and I was like, I was the boss that was like, if you late, okay. Like, it's cool. Like, as long as you do your job, I'm that person. Very much like, look, I trust you. You're an adult. You can do your work. I'm not like super into that, but it's a lot of politics when you manage people. So I was there for like 2 years, maybe almost 3 years. But it was a cool time. I loved to be up in Northern Virginia. So I enjoyed that.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how old were you at that point? Was it like mid-20s?
Yeah. I probably was, I don't know, maybe 26. Yeah. I think I was 26 around that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Managing people. Literally learning on the job every day. I had a manager who was like, he wasn't creative, but he was kind of just like, I trust you. And he kind of just let me run my team my own way. So I was able to kind of implement like project management tools. Like that's when we first like started using Trello. Like Trello was new back then. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to have to like, track y'all down, micromanage. Let's use Trello. We kind of like learned how to use it together. We use it as a tool. That was kind of like my first time, like, before Asana and all these other tools. Like Trello was like, it was like the beginning stage.
Yeah, the one, yeah.
Yeah, so Trello was like, I'm sure there were other things that were out then, but that was kind of like the new, the new thing.
The wave, yeah.
So we started using that. So I was like 26 years old, managing a team up in Northern Virginia. I'm like, how did I get here? But it was a cool opportunity. I learned a lot in that role for sure.
Yeah. So it seems like you had a quote unquote stable job. When was the point that you started to pivot to doing things outside of like work?
Always have. So I think early on, I realized that like work for me was never going to be like enough, right? Like I knew that when you work for a company, you're building their brand, you have their guidelines, you're pushing their agenda. So you kind of have to like, fit within a box. And for me, I always wanted to have the opportunity to do things that made me happy, that I like to do. So I started in college. I would do things like I had an internship, worked for the college, but I was like doing design stuff on the side. So I always knew I was like, okay, I'm going to just do side stuff. So I started my business in 2007. So I graduated 2006. By that January, I had like formalized my business, applied for a business license, and I was like working alongside of my career always. So I've always freelanced from the beginning of like when I started using software. I was like, okay, I'm going to make money doing this stuff. And I've always had that mentality. I've always worked with like Black folk on the side, like I said, sororities, my school stuff. But it gave me an opportunity to like really do things that I felt good for me. You know what I mean? Like things I was passionate about. And so I think that balance allowed me to never have to put like so much of my everything into my job, right? Like I could do my job and not feel like I wasn't fulfilled because of it, because I always had another space to like exercise creativity, to push myself, to work with people who were doing unique things. And I think that balance has really worked for me really well, because I get to just, I don't know, if I see somebody that's doing something or they reach out to me, I want to be a part of it. I have always been able to kind of do that, but always have like work as the stability part. And work has taught me a lot about like, like soft skills, like how to work with folks, how to project manage, how to manage people. I've learned that from jobs. And then I've taken those skills and I've used it in my freelance and vice versa. So I think both of those areas have kind of helped each other. But yeah, I've always freelanced like my entire career.
Mm-hmm. So since you formalized the business, when was there a point that like the work that you were doing was equivalent to the money that you were asking for? Right? Because I know, like for me, it took me a minute to kind of like not be afraid to ask for a specific dollar. Like, when was it for you? Like this is no longer a passion. You got to the point, your mindset was like, I need to actually get paid for what I'm doing.
Yeah, because I was like the 150 for the Flash websites was definitely not going far, you know. I mean, actually, it was back then. It really helped to fuel. I love clothes and shoes. It was like it was helpful. I definitely appreciated, you know, going out, being a college student, having that extra change. So that was helpful. I remember my very first job. This chick named Jolinda. I still know her today. She's a dope artist. She was a contractor, and she came in to work at my job for a couple months. And we were having a conversation, and we were talking about like logos. And I was just like, "How much do you charge for a logo?" And I think back then, I feel like I was charging like $450 for a logo, which was actually a lot, right?
$450.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I felt like I was doing the thing, you know, because I'm like, I was doing a websites for $150 just like, you know, 2-3 years before that, right? So I'm like, okay, $450, I'm definitely making, and that had been like a progress, right? Like I started off with like $150 and I would, you know, go up or whatever. And I met her maybe a couple years into working there, and she was like, I charge $1,000 for a logo. And I was like, and she said, yeah, so like for every 2 logos you do, I do one.
Just do one. Wow.
And I was just like, yo. And I was just like, okay, I gotta like change my prices, you know? And it was her being transparent enough to tell me that was, you know, helpful. But she also believed in my ability to be able to like make the kind of money that she was making, right? So it wasn't like oh, you know, I'm doing it longer than you, so like you can kind of stay where you at. She's basically like, no, you can make this kind of money. And I think that was really pivotal for me. I tell her all the time how pivotal it was for me. And I really started to shift my mindset about my worth as an artist at that point. And that was a few years into my first job. But I think being around other people who valued their work, who were getting paid, really gave me like the courage to say like, well, why not me? You know, like I felt like we were working in the same space. We were peers at work. And so I was like, okay, I got to like make some shifts. And I think when you change your pricing, the first person that pays it cements the idea that you are worth it. The person that says, you're like, hey, it's $1,000 for a logo. Right? I'm like, not only am I not doubling, I'm like going up to her rate. I'm like, okay, I'm going for $450. I'm going to go to $1,000 because that's what she's saying. Some people were like, oh, it's a little, you know, that's kind of high, you know? And then somebody was kind of like, all right, so what do I pay the deposit? And I'm sitting there like.
Just like that.
Oh, wow. Like, okay, so this is like.
Somebody will pay it.
Somebody will pay it. And so I think that was a huge lesson for me about, I think it's important to understand, you know, where you are with your skill set, right? Like, if you've just started working and you've never done anything, I mean, I think $1,000 logo might be a lot. But when you get to that place where you really understand that you have value to bring, then you understand that value that you bring deserves to be compensated for it. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And I have increased my rates since then, always.
Okay, I was about to say,
so, yeah, that was like
a
long time ago.
Yeah, because when you said like, I think $1,000 logo is a lot, I was like, I hope that you kind of like went up from that price point.
Nah, I definitely charge more than that for a logo. And I mean, it just depends on who the client is, right? And I think that's, you got to like really look at the landscape. I don't think you should have a one size fits all for things. If a large corporation comes and they want a logo and they have 20,000 employees, you don't charge the same as a small business that has 2 people working there, right? Because you have to think about the reach of the work that you're creating. So, you know, I think that was a foundation for me. I always remember it. And I think having a full-time job allowed me to ask for what I felt like I deserved. And if I didn't get it, it was okay.
Yeah.
I was still going to work every day and I was still getting paychecks. So I think that was helpful for me to have that balance for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great journey to see like where you came from, like charging $450 to getting to $1,000, beyond $1,000. When you said $450, it showed me from my perspective how little I was charging. Like in the beginning, I was charging people like $10.
Well, I mean, you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah. And then like I started to realize like it was a lot of work that I was doing, especially for like the many iterations like people were asking for. And I remember I was talking to my mother one day and she was like, you're really putting a lot of work in for like $10. Like, I was like, you're right. Like, let me try to go to 50. I asked for 50.
And somebody paid it.
And then it was like, okay, like if I can ask for 50, then like I can ask for more. But I think like at that point, I kind of got like tapped out.
Yeah.
Because I was taking
so much.
I was taking so many projects to your point where your friend was like, Jolinda was like, well, I'm only doing one logo versus like your 2 or 4 logos for like
same price.
Much more.
Yeah.
And that kind of like just changed my perspective. I was trying to overcompensate by trying to get the money, but I was charging too little. And I think that's just like a testament now, kind of like where I'm at now. It's just like, I'd rather do less.
That's the goal.
To get paid more.
Less work, more money. That's what I took from that. And that should be the goal. But I think also like, you know, you're thinking about where you were when you were charging $10 and today your skill set has changed. Like you have a lot more talent. You've learned a lot more things. You know how to use certain software that people don't know how to use. You know, your output is different. So it can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go from $10 to $10,000 when you don't have, you know, the stuff to back it up. But as you learn and grow and become stronger in your craft, it's a lot easier to demand more money because now you're providing a service that you have worked and put in the time to, you know, do it. And I can't remember who said it, but, you know, someone was like, if it takes me an hour to do a logo, you're not paying me for the hour. You're paying me for like the 10 years that I've worked to become the person I am today. And I think that that's the thing.
It's a fact.
And a lot of people get caught up in like, you know, it's a lot. I'm like, no, but you like, think about, I mean, if you go to school, like, I went to Carolina. It was like $120,000. Yeah, and that was back then. I don't know what it is today.
It's
maybe
way more now.
$250,000. Yeah. But like, you put that kind of money in to go get a degree, right? So that's a part of the value that then becomes who you are, right? You go in, you put in, you know, hours of time. You're doing projects. Like, you're taking the time to learn your craft. You're coming out. You're starting small. You're doing this work. All of that, you know, brings value to the table. Yeah. So when you're thinking about how to like price yourself, you got to say like, okay, I got a degree, I got a background, I spent hours. Even if it was like, I watched 15 YouTube channels. Yeah. I mean, if they were 1 hour a piece, that's 15 hours of time that you put in to learn a new technique or whatever. That is the value that you bring that other people aren't able to do, right? You can do something that someone else can't do. Close, yep. So you gotta, you know, and also, you know, if you value yourself too low, then it doesn't seem like you're confident in what you're able to bring, right? So somebody might be like, okay, so it's only $100, and they feel like, oh, I'm not going to get quality work, right? So, you know, it's kind of like a double-edged sword when it comes to figuring out like value in a creative space, for sure.
No, that's a fact. You speaking on it, like I remember, like I don't do logos that often anymore. I don't really do like too much graphics, but like I remember charging $10, and then I got to a client. It was like a tip figure. No, yeah, it was a 6-figure deal, and for the logo specifically, I charged like $16,000, and he didn't budge. And that just showed me, like, just I in that moment, I thought about like how far I came from like $10 to get into the point of like $16,000 for like a particular logo. It's the same process, but like obviously like the years of experience, and at that point, I had so much more confidence because I put the work in. Like, even though like the logo took me about like 30 minutes to create, like it was, to your point, like it was the years that took me to creating that work, which where the value really came from. And, you know, what you said earlier, like you you charge based off of like the client, like what the value is going to mean to the particular client. Like it's not going to be the same every single time. It's going to be different depending on the client.
Yep.
That's
I think about like, I think that they talked about like the lady who did the Nike logo. Like I think they charged like I think she paid like $75 or something. I may have to go back and like give her stock because they were just like. But if you think about it, I think the story is. It's not even just the $75, but you think about like the company, right? And like how far they've gone with something that she created. And so when you're thinking about working for a larger company, your logo is going to go much farther than if it's a smaller company. So to charge the same wouldn't make sense, right? If your logo is going to be on buildings and they might be selling things, like you have to think about all the places where your client is going to, end up and try to create understand the value that it's going to bring to that company. And so I don't have like a one size fits all. I have like a base price, but it definitely shifts depending on like what the company is, how it's going to be used, also how much research I'm going to have to do in order to make sure that like it's something that like no one has. So, I think you got to be flexible with value, but I think starting at a place where you just say, whatever it is, it's going to be something that's worth my time, that when I get compensated, I'm not going to feel like, I didn't get enough for that.
It's a valid point.
Yeah, you got to always like think. I always tell people now, like, if I was to ask you to do something and I was to say like, hey, I got a PDF, right? And I'm like, can you change the address on it? What would be worth your time to do it? Not about how easy it is, right? But like, how do you choose the value of your time? So for me, it was like, all right, well, I would like to be able to buy gas, get something to eat, maybe buy myself something for every hour that I spend. That's how I look at it, right? Like if I can only get, a combo from Chick-fil-A for an hour of my time, that doesn't make sense to me. So I had to sit down and say like, okay, what is an hour of my time? What's the value of that? And like, how do you figure out a dollar amount that makes sense? And I think you look at your life, you look at like, your experience, what you're bringing to the table. And I think that helps you create more value for yourself by saying like, if I got to put all of my years, if I got to wear a backpack around of everything I know, all of my experience, everything, what does it cost me to put that backpack down and do something for somebody?
Yeah.
So even if it's just editing a PDF, well, you got to have a software that allows you to open it up. So you're paying for the software to have it. You got to know design enough to know that you're not going to break it in order to just do it. So there's things that are become intuitive to you, but it still is something that you're offering. And I think it's more about value than money, and I think that people get those things confused. You could do something for $100 that brings you like a lot of value and you might feel good walking away, and you look at it and say like, hey, I'm proud of what I did. Or you could do something for $15,000, $20,000 and you might feel like that was the value that made sense for that. So I think it's really looking at what are you getting from it? And like, do you feel good about that when you like walk away at the end of the day? To me, that's what's important as a creative for myself. In the things that I do.
So when was the point where the value started to correlate to the client? Like when did you start getting bigger clients in correlation to the value?
So this is where I think working comes into play, like working in companies. So in a lot of my roles, starting from the very beginning, I started to see like we would contract out certain things. And I started to look at like what we were paying hourly for things that like, so the contractor is doing what I'm doing, right? And I'm looking at what we pay them hourly and I'm looking at what I make hourly.
It's completely
and
different.
I'm like, okay, I get it because I got insurance and all these other things. But I'm also like, okay, so they're making this kind of money hourly. And I think being exposed to that, like I always tell people, I don't know why people don't talk money. I'm like, talk money.
Yeah.
Like, tell people how much you make, especially your friends, so they know what's happening around them, what to ask for, what to look for. I mean, the only person that it benefits by not talking about money is our companies. And so I was able to kind of see what, like, Jalinda, what she was making, what we were paying other people. And so I started to say, like, okay, I could do these things, right? I started to hone in on, like, my skill set, right? So I'm like, I'm not just a graphic designer, right? So now I learn I'm more of a strategist, right? So I started realizing, like, okay, I can design things that look great, but really the thing that's helpful for me that's different is, like, strategy, right? Like, my brain and how I'm processing it.
Yeah.
And so I started to add value to those things. So when I started to think about what people were making, like what companies were paying folks, like corporate companies are paying agencies or contractors, when my value of, like, my skill set started going up, that's when things started to be like, okay, now it's time to, like, really bring up the value and, like, what I am able to ask for. And I would increase it every year, whether I felt like there was a reason or not. I felt like I learned something. If I learned something new, if there's a new software, I'm like, all right, well, my price isn't going up because I now have another skill set that I'm able to offer. And so the more I became comfortable with what I was able to offer, and also looking around to say, like, okay, people are definitely going to pay this, right? Like, I've seen people pay more for less. I started to be able to, like, kind of hone in on, like, what I'm able to offer and be confident in that. And I mean, listen, you go to somebody and you ask for $10,000 and you don't seem confident, they can tell you don't seem confident. You go up there and you be like, it's $10,000. I'll send you the invoice. You know, people are kind of like, okay. Right? And it doesn't mean that you're, like, making things up, because you have some foundation of, like, oh, I've seen it being done this way. I've talked to people. I know they're getting that. So it really is just, like, the more experience I gained, the more confident I was able to be in my craft. So the more confident I was to be able to ask for more money. And again, having a job kind of helped me with some transparency in a space where I don't. When you're in an industry where it's like, it's not a lot of people that look like you, I don't have a lot of people where I can go to be like, hey, like, how much you make at your job? How much you make it for contract work? It's hard to figure out what makes sense when there's no one to tell you. And for me, I learned through jobs. And at the jobs, you'd be surprised at how transparent the people that you work with actually ended up being for me. And they would be like, yeah, we paid, $60,000, for this thing. And I'm sitting there like, take a mental note on that one, like $60,000 for a logo. And I'm like, what do we give? What was included? What was the process? And, I learned from that and just doing research online. So the more I understood, the more I was exposed, the more the price went up.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like, and that's why, to your point of, people should be more transparent about, like, when it comes to pricing. That was the reason I also gave, like, the number of, like, 16,000, because I didn't personally know anybody who made, like, 16,000 off, like, a logo. Even though I don't do them as often, that just kind of, like, shows you that, like,
oh, it's money out there.
The money's out there. The money's out there, especially, like, if you put the work in and have the experience, and also, have the confidence to be able to, like, asking for such a number like that, and not, like, being too shy and too timid, because
all I can say is no.
Yep.
If they say no, someone else will say yes. You can always ask questions. If someone says no, I mean, what's the harm? In asking? I think it's more harm in not asking, because then you're questioning your value. Like, if you feel like, if you're going into a situation, you feel like, hey, I feel like it should be $16,000, and you go in there and you ask for less, well, now you're devaluing yourself because you feel like you deserve more. If you ask for what it is and they say, hey, that doesn't work for me, then you have a choice on whether you can say, I can go down and I can be flexible, or I can't. And I think that being flexible is also important. Like, if your package included a bunch of stuff for $16,000 and they budget couldn't, afford it, then maybe you offer a different package with less work.
All that stuff,
And you still, maybe you say it's 10. So I think that it helps you build confidence when you kind of just go after what you feel like you're worth. As long as you do, I mean, it's just like a regular job, right? You don't go into a job and be like, I think I deserve $150,000 for this role. And they're kind of like, based on what? It's the same idea where it's like, you got to say like, all right, I've done research. I know what people are paying. I know what I'm bringing to the table. This is what I'm going to offer you. Like, this is the difference, like what I'm able to do that other people aren't, right? Like what makes you unique. Part of what people are buying is into the person. Like we're buying into you. If they say, I love your work, I feel like I love your point of view, I love your perspective, that's a value that you're bringing to the table. And you have to figure out how to put a monetary number on that value. But it's something that's unique to you. And I think Black folks in general, like a lot of us have that imposter syndrome because we're operating in spaces where like we don't see anyone else that looks like us. So it's kind of like, well, who do I ask? And how do I, how do I like measure myself up to someone else? Because I don't know anyone. But conversations like we've worked together before. We've been transparent about money. I think those things help you be, more confident in spaces. And we've talked about like stuff that we've seen in the media where people have getting paid like crazy numbers. And we both are just like, yeah, so that just means we got to charge more like the next time, right? Because we see it being paid. It's just really paying attention to like the industry and like what's happening. But the money is out there for sure. As long as you're able to provide like quality service and, it be unique and it's a value, people will definitely pay.
Yeah. When was the point where you started to be much more selective for the type of clients that you were taking in terms of, because obviously you would have a price point of a particular thing that you wanted to get from a particular project, and obviously everyone wouldn't accept that price point. Did you start to become much more selective in determining which type of person you were going to work with?
Yeah, so I think the big determining factor is time. Right? Like I have a finite amount of time, especially because I work full time. So I have like, I can only take a certain amount of clients per year. So the price went up because I just didn't have the time, right? So I had to be like, okay, how can I make money with like less work? Because that's always the goal. Like, I want to make more for doing less. I mean, like that's what we want to do.
It's a fact, yeah.
But then I realized like that time is also, like I said, it's finite and I don't get more, right? So if I think like, okay, I got a job, I got to put in work for that. I have limited time on a daily basis. And then I'm doing all kinds of other things that I just want to do for myself that doesn't really pay, but I just like passion projects. And so as my time started to decrease, I started to say like, all right, I have to be much more selective in like who I work with. And I kind of was like, everybody's not my client. So sometimes people send stuff and I might be like, I'm not really in the space for that. And I just kind of recommend them, to other people who may be a better fit. I know everybody's not my client.
Yeah.
I'm looking for certain types of businesses that feel good to me, that I really want to like see succeed. I'm really invested in the businesses I work with.
Yeah.
And so I think because I have limited time and I'm only able to take a certain amount of clients per year, that kind of started to dictate what my clients look like. Now, pricing wise, I still don't really change the price.
Yeah.
So I have an ideal client. I have, ideal industries that I like. I really love working with Black women specifically. So those are like my ideal clients, but the price is still it's still the price. So if someone comes to me and I'm like, oh, I would love to work with them, I don't necessarily adjust my price to work with them. I just stay at the same price and I say, this is what it costs. I would love to work with you. Of course, throughout, if somebody commits to me, right, if they say like, hey, I really want to work with you, if I'm invested in their business, I think that there are things that I give to clients, right? And that could be advice, time, things that I don't charge for because I am invested in their success. And because I know that I'm that kind of person, I want to make sure that I really believe in the businesses that I work with. Because I may sit down and have a whole conversation and I'm like, hey, I was looking at your social media, and I might just say like, I think you should do blah, blah, blah. And that is strategy, right? That is time that could be billed. But I am invested in their success. So I know that that's a part of the experience. So yes, my price stays the same. But I'm passionate about the people that I do take on as clients. Like I really like want to see them succeed.
Yeah. So you bring up passion projects, right? So there's a difference of having a job where you do work that you love, and then having a side gig or your business where you do work for clients, but then it's like another thing to like have these like passion projects, and you have a couple passion projects.
I do.
Tell us more about like all of the passion projects that you have.
So I have an organization I created. It's called the Her Collective. I started that in 2018. It is a membership-based organization for Black women in Richmond. And often I will say my passion projects come from a need that either I see or that I have. So for me, I was kind of like, there's all these stereotypes about Black women not getting along. That really hasn't been my personal journey. Like I said, I'm in a sorority. Like I love my line sisters. I'm a Delta. Shout out to my sorors. That's not my experience, but I feel like that is a stereotype that exists. And so I really wanted to create a space that we could like really have a space for Black women to get together and talk about all the things. And so I created that in 2018. So that's still going. We have a membership portion. So we have members that kind of create like opportunities, experiences. We have like social media. Before COVID, we would get together and do things. We had a brunch that we created where we basically gave flowers to other Black women because, sometimes no one gives the flowers. So we do things for each other that sometimes we don't get, from other people. And I think we have like 900 people in our Facebook group. It's like, it's crazy. It's like 900 members in the Facebook group. And that's just a public forum where people can talk about what they're doing, talk about their business, whatever. So that's a passion project that I started. Love doing that. Love seeing Black women come together. I feel like Black women can do anything individually, but when we together, I feel like it's some like real things about to happen. And then during COVID, I get asked a lot about like, when I say I can't do work, the next question is, do I know anybody? Now, I don't do video, right? There are a lot of things I don't do in the creative space. So a lot of times I get asked for recommendations. So I decided to create Black Creatives RVA. So that was during the COVID times, which is basically a directory of Black creatives in Richmond. So the goal of that was basically like, if you want to work with Black folks that are creatives, we're out here.
Yeah.
And, people are like, oh, where are they? We are here. Okay. Like I have found us. I search for us. I look for us, but we are here, right? Like we are steadily like, infiltrating these spaces. We're, creatives in all different lanes. So I created that platform. It's an online directory. You can go in there and search by like experience, by different like areas, art directors, creative directors, graphic designers, illustrators. I'm actually going to kind of like revamp it next year. Another graphic designer, his name is Andre Johnson. Like he's one of my favorite designers in the city. He did Black RVA with us. We're kind of working together to kind of like revamp it a little bit because we really want to make it a tool where creatives can kind of come together. And you and I have talked about it too. Like, how do we talk about starting a business? Like, let's share the tips and tools that we've learned with each other. So we're going to kind of take it from just being a web platform and a social media platform to maybe do some in-person things. But that came from just like things that I see, right? Like, what can I do? I definitely can build a website. I definitely know that I have clients who are looking for this type of work. So if I can take opportunity to like match up creatives that are looking for work with people who are trying to pay, then I would love to put money into the pockets of other creatives for them to get the recognition that they deserve, to get the money they deserve, because there's a lot of work out here. So those are like my two big passion projects that are kind of whenever I get a chance, whenever I get downtime, which isn't too often, I try to work on those things. Like, I don't get paid anything for that.
Yeah.
It's just like
fact,
things I like to do that make me feel good. You know, if something happened and I wasn't here and I think about what my legacy is, I want to make sure that I'm creating something that is changing someone's life in some type of way or making it better. So that's the areas where I feel like I could help.
Yeah. So I can imagine like your time is much more limited now, especially with you. Obviously, you're a wife, but you're a mom.
Yeah.
You became a mom within like the last 2 years. How has that balance been with, you know, pursuing your passion, work, being a wife? Like, what's...
Man, at first I was like, look, this right here is crazy. The transition from being like, you know, when you're married, and I'm married to, like, my husband is a music producer, software engineer. We're like two creatives, right? So our marriage is like, he do his thing, I do my thing. We both respect our time. We both got side hustles, you know, and it has flowed really well for like, probably 8 years before we had our daughter. Having a kid, like, ooh, that thing just kind of like stop you in your tracks. Like, you literally are responsible for like a little person, like literally surviving. Like, every day I would be like, we made it another day. And because you don't really have a book, you don't know. But I had to put a pause on a lot of things that I was doing. Obviously, I took a break from work because maternity leave, but I had to take a maternity leave from design, right? Like, I couldn't even do the things that I needed to do. And it's been an uphill battle to like get back into the swing of things, right? Like, you know, I go home, I want to spend time with her, and then I might have work to do. And I don't want her to grow up and her experience is like, Ma, you're always on the computer. You know, like, I don't want that to be her experience, like, in her home life. So I really have pulled back a lot from freelance work. I just want to enjoy like family time. So we do a lot of stuff together. You know, when I'm at home and she's awake, I'm not really doing work. Like, I don't pull my computer out. If I do, all she gonna do is like tear the keys up, and I can't do work anyway. So, you know, I just want to be a mom in those spaces. But, you know, that whole conversation about being selective, you got to really be selective because my time is like, I mean, it was already tight, but it's like extra tight. So I literally next year will not take clients for the whole first Q1 and Q2.
Wow.
And I've told people that, and they're like, really? And I'm like, yo, I just got to take time to just do things for myself, you know, like the things I've been like, I got trial websites that I started, you know, like that I want to like get, you know, set up, just things that I want to do, that I want to revamp my own stuff. Like, I don't even post things I do. Like, my portfolio is like super dated. So time is like the greatest value that we have, but I don't want my time to be so filled that I'm not able to like be the mom that I want to be. So that is like, being a mom and a wife is like superseding everything else.
Yeah.
And then that's why I'm like really selective with my clients. Like, I have clients for next year, which is why I'm like, I'm not taking any more. I have contracts, you know, which I'm going to focus more on, like, you know, contracts versus like one-offs, because the one-offs typically take a long time. So time is more, I think it'll probably get more and more limited. Like, I'm like, now she's little, like next thing I know, she's going to be like, I want to take dance class or play soccer. And then I'm going to be like, no time. So, yeah.
No, I think I've, you know, with you saying it, obviously I've seen it, but like with you actually saying how like having a child like just changes so many things, and you really need to have time to spend time with the person that you created. And I think for me, parts of me, I've been a little selfish in that regards, right? Because like, I really love what I do. Like, I don't like want to stop at the pace that I'm doing it, because I feel like there's so much inside of me. Yeah. And I know, and I've seen, and now that I hear, it's just like, yo, like, I will have to, in many ways, kind of like step back from that to a certain degree to focus on like having this family and, you know, this child or these children. It's just, and so, you know, I think about like the sacrifice, like with my parents and the things that the person who they were before they had me.
Yeah, you'll never be the person you were before you have a kid. People always said that. You know, people always say all this random, like, you'll never be the same, you know, and then you're like, okay, like, I'm going to definitely get back to myself, but it changes you. Like, it literally, like, I think mentally changes you, especially for women. Like, it does something to your brain. Like, it never really, like, actually is the same. But it's just a different part of life, you know what I mean? Like, you're just walking into a different space. And I think that, you know, if you think about the things that like we do, like passion projects, right?
Yeah.
It really a lot of times is us seeing a need. Yeah. And then we're like, oh, I'm a creative person. How can I use my skills and talent to kind of like help this need that I see? And I think that what happens when you become a parent is maybe you see different needs, right? Like you have a different lens that you look through. So like, you know, you can have a kid and be like, I'm going to start a whole kid time video series, right? Like I think about Gracie's Corner, like Black Family was like, oh, we're going to do, you know, these videos that are like, you know, hip hop like songs. And that was a need because like his daughter was like in that space and he wanted something that she could, you know, look at. So I think it just changes, like your needs change. But I think that your creativity always is going to rise to the occasion. So I look at it as just like walking into a different lane in life. But I just use it differently. Like now I'm just, you know, I use creativity. I make stuff for her, you know, like I used it to decorate. Like I use like different parts of my brain to be a mom. But I don't think the creativity ever goes anywhere. I just think they kind of just
reframes.
Yeah. It kind of shifts into something else. Yeah, for sure. But it's a good thing though. I mean, you can't be the same forever. Like we don't want to be like 65 years old, like out here being like, let me create this website for young creatives. It's like, all right, well at that point you need to be making websites for like old creatives, right? Because we old, so like we got to move with the time. So
No, I mean that's a valid point. Like, you know, to the Gracie Corners like concept, I definitely did, like one day. I don't really think about like kids that much, in terms of like my kid personally. But
I didn't either, but they come.
Yeah, but I guess I like one day I was just sitting and I was just like, yo, like what type of like father I would be, right? And would I incorporate like my creative abilities to like solving a problem that like my kid potentially will have. And I did think about that. I thought about that for like 5 minutes and then I didn't go back to it, but you kind of like bring it back up and it's like, yo, like that's a valid point how us being creative, it just kind of like reframes itself in a different perspective. Like when you have this like,
when you was making $10 logos, right? Whatever the problem is that you had at the time, the brain that you had was like, okay, like I'm going to make logos. I'm going to $10. And then it's like, okay, I learned more. As you learn more, you like literally shift. And I think as we get older, you know, like you'll do this and then something else will come up as your life shifts. And then you'll say, how can I use my creativity now? And that's one thing I love about being creative. Is I don't think there's like an age, you know, or really like a time. Like, I don't think anybody can be like, look, you know, when you turn 70, like you can't be creative. I'm like, no.
It's not like basketball, like sports.
It's like you're not going to phase out of it. You know, I think you just create like, maybe we just be 70 making like quilts or something. I don't know. Maybe I'll learn how to sew. I think creativity can kind of like ebb and flow into, you know, all of these different areas. And that's the one thing I love about it. Cause I just feel like there is no finite end to being creative. Like it goes on forever until you decide if you don't want to do it anymore. But I just don't see myself ever not. I mean, even if it's like decorating houses, doing something at home, moving furniture around, I don't know. I think I would be creative forever. And I love that when I look at my life, if I'm not working, I know that I'll be creative in some way and it'll never really leave me. You know what I mean? Like it'll be there forever. I find comfort in that. So I don't feel rushed to be anything, you know, like now, like new technology comes out. All right, cool. Like I'll learn it. You know, I'll figure it out. But I don't feel like I gotta be on everything or that it's a fleeting thing or that like someone's gonna be like, hey, you can't design logos because you're like 55. No. Definitely will be able to still be creative in the ways that we are. We just may shift what the end product looks like. So.
You know, to your point, like there are seasons. Like we go through seasons, like just like with our personal lives. So like seasons within like just being a creative. Because I think like when we first met, I was doing like more video content, and we came together at the church, and like we was trying to figure out like the branding for that.
Yep.
But like now I
I
rarely
read about that. Yep.
I rarely do like
The branding stuff.
not only branding, but like just like video stuff.
Really?
Like, yeah, which is it's kind of crazy. Like I do video stuff, but it's
what
not.
What are you doing?
It's not as.
I'm like, I mean, of course, I'm like, this is. I guess I consider
this is different. Yeah,
but this is
This
so
is more like a passion project.
What is your thing now?
I'm more so like just like art direction.
Okay.
So like I love.
But that's like I think that transition makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess like I really wanted to get away from video because it was much more. What's the word?
Demanding.
Yeah, it's much more demanding on the body, right? Like especially because
that's why you can't do it forever. Like you're definitely not gonna be a 70-year-old like videographer.
Nope.
Trying to get down on your knees to get the shot. You know, like you have to move into something else.
And that's what like got me into like investing like my money like into like just like different assets.
Oh,
because
you doing stocks?
Yes, I mean just different types of things.
Yeah,
and it was like I can't. I did a job and I was like, yo, like I can't do this until like I'm 70. I don't want to do this at 70 years old. Like I just thought about that. I was like, yo, I can't foresee myself like in that position. And obviously because I've had like different seasons of like just like different things. Like I had my own boutique. I created like a film. I just many. I used to be a photographer, like and stuff like that. So like I've had like many different seasons, and so like I knew like this season was shall to pass, right? Like, but like I just knew that I did not want to put my body on the line in that term of like getting on my knees, like getting on the floor, like just different things. But I also started to see how the market was changing and how it was like becoming saturated in a sense. And
there's
so,
like short clips, not even really. I don't even know if people value like cinematography in the way because it's so like instant.
It's
like,
facts.
oh, I'm gonna just make a reel in the Instagram app.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like if I was like, hey, can you go to a restaurant and shoot video? Like you're taking your real camera, you know what I mean? Like you're panning everything else. People are like on their phone, just like quick shot, and then it's a reel.
It's a fact. Yeah.
So like, yeah, you do have to shift as things start to shift. And I think that the best thing we can do as creatives is to not get stagnant in whatever it is that we do. And to just say, if, time comes and it pushes me in another area, just be okay with like moving into something else.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to always be stuck. So yeah, I don't even know. I don't think we've talked about like where you're at. Cause of course we met doing branding. Video was kind of like your main thing. That's why I brought you into Black RVA specifically for video.
The video, yeah.
But yeah, it is changing. Yeah. And first of all, I'm glad you said investing. Like creatives in general, it's like entrepreneurial, I want to make money, but I think we have to be really mindful about what our future looks like, right? Because the same idea is like, you're like, I don't want to be doing this when I'm 70. Well, if we're not planning, you will be doing something then because you're not going to have the things to fall back on. And so I think, a lot of people have started to invest like in stocks and stuff and learning those things, especially throughout COVID times, but really just understanding like all of the accounts and ways that we can make money, just investing our money or like, oh, I got a SEP IRA, I have a regular IRA, like all of these things, like saving for retirement. I think those things are like super important because it's going to shift. It's always going to shift. And the things that you learn today, it may take you a few years to learn a new skill, right? If you say like, hey, videography is cool, but I really want to like now move into another area, it may take you a little time to like make the shift, make the transition. But if you have like foundational things that you have started of like, for every money I get, a certain amount of money, I take this and invest it, I put it to the side. I think all of those things allow you to kind of move fluidly through different like highs and lows that it, being a creative, you're an entrepreneur, it allows you to kind of move through it without having to like sacrifice the passion and like the desire. Because I feel like when money comes in and people are so focused on it, I feel like you lose sight of like what's inside, like the burning thing that's like in there that's like create something, because you're like led by like how much you're gonna make from it. And I think that almost like takes some of the authenticity away from art, which is why I'm like, the grind culture and like entrepreneurship. I'm like, okay, why can't we have hobbies still?
It's a fact.
Yeah.
We can't really predict the future, and many things bring different challenges and different perspectives on outlooks of life. But as of now, what can you imagine the trajectory of your life going from the standpoint of like just being a creative?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think just at like a super like granular level, I think it's always having a creative like spirit and having that be like the focus or like the driving force behind the things that I do. I have so many ideas. I'm definitely one of those people that like throw out like, I should start at this and I should do that. So I have so many ideas that I want to do. A lot of them, around like Black creatives, Black women, Black marriages, like all of that stuff. So it just, to me, would just be wherever wherever I'm led. Like, I don't even know if I have any defining thing. I'm one of those people that I just feel like wherever the universe kind of like pushes me, and the universe, I mean, I don't even know what that means, but wherever God leads me is where I feel like I'm going to go, right? And I think the biggest thing for me is just making sure that I use my talent to make somebody else's life better. And also, like, I don't want to leave this life without giving what I've learned back to someone else. So that's probably my biggest thing, like being a mentor. I really want to work with kids in some capacity to really show them like, hey, this is like a viable career choice. Like if you are creative, if you like computers, you can do this, for a career. So I really would love to work with kids in some capacity. But, I think I'm going to always be creating new things and pushing myself to learn new things, going where technology takes me, but ultimately just trying to leave this world a better place than what it is. Like that's like my goal. Like, what can I do to make somebody else's life better, or specifically like people in my community? So that's probably the driving force. From a creative standpoint, I don't know. Who knows? Like, I work full time. I do freelance. I see myself continuing to do that and work with businesses. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's a good question though.
Yes, it's sometimes it's good to think about the future. So if you had to leave a gem for someone who was like you as a child, or maybe a teenager, someone going through college, and they're kind of like need that extra inspiration to kind of like keep it moving, keep moving forward. What is something that you will leave with them?
I think my thing that I wish I could tell like every young kid is like,
come closer to the mic.
Okay. I would say the one thing I would want to tell like anybody that's creative, especially that looks like me, is you are enough and you belong. Creativity is so subjective. Like no one can tell you what really is good or bad, right? It's like really believing in yourself. And I feel like confidence in yourself, pushing yourself to like learn and grow is the best thing that you can do. But even if you're in a space and you don't see anyone around that looks like you, it doesn't mean that you don't belong there, because we do belong. And what we're bringing to the table is enough. And, we don't have to compare ourselves to anyone else. But trust that, what's in your heart and who you are is enough for you to be whoever you want to be.
Mm. You're enough.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I definitely learned a lot more about your story. Obviously, we've talked over the years, but like to hear extensively about like your thought process and like where you started to like where you're at now, I think it's going to be beneficial for those who are listening, those who need this message. So thank you for just like giving me your time, because I know time is really valuable, especially with the amount of the whole many things that you do, but also being a human, being a mom, being a wife, being a daughter. Like, yeah, time is precious. Time is precious.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating this platform. You know, I love all the things that you're doing. I'm like super supportive.
Yeah, most definitely.
And I feel like, you know, as we move into these spaces, the best thing we can do as creatives is to make space for other people, to make it just a little bit easier than it was for us. So I appreciate you and all the creativity that you take from your brain and create these things. It's definitely needed, and it's definitely appreciated by other folks in this community for sure.
Appreciate it. Well, my name is Antonio Knoxx. That is Shannon Bass, and this was The Gradient Radio.